following my channel, you know I'm a huge proponent of not only being able to repair your gear, but also make your own gear if that's at all possible. And I think after the vlog this past week when the canopy of our classroom area collapsed and had a rip in it and I repaired it, it sparked all the interest back up around sewing and repair. And it is important, and that's something that we really need to understand to be more self-reliant when we're out here in the outdoors. Also, the equipment that we use and wear, if it's more traditional like I love, canvas, cotton, leather, wool, all of those type of items are very easily repaired with just a needle and thread. So you don't need any kind of complex equipment to be able to repair everything that we have out here. It really requires two needles, at least I think so, because I've done a lot of repairs over the years, I've made a lot of things over the years, and it really just boils down to having two good needles. First style of needle is a yarn darner needle, and these can just be purchased at any box store. It's a typical long, slender needle with a point. And they're very strong, they're very robust, they're great for working with any type of material that has a woven pattern. So think of anything woven, and that's what this needle comes into play with and works really, really well. This is what I repaired the top canopy of the shelter with, was a needle very similar to this. Then we move on to the S needle, probably my favorite needle of all time. This is a three-sided sharpened point. This is absolutely great for punching through material such as leather or hides. It just works really well. The beauty of this needle is that when you're gonna set it, you can place your thumb back like this and you can push real hard with it. And that's going to allow you to punch through that material very easily. These two needles are a winning combination for sure. Now, to go along with those needles that we just looked at, having some type of cordage is a must. That's going to be actually your thread. We all carry cordage normally in the field, but some good options for sewing that's going to hold up really well is the thinner bank line, the number 72 bank line. You can break that down because it's 3-strand. Break it down into one single strand and it's great. That's the majority of the time the type of thread that I use. But other options are inner strands of paracord. You can also use dental floss, you can use artificial sinew. There's a lot of different things out there. Just pick something that's very versatile that you can use in other applications, and that way you're minimizing your kit and you still have the resource to be able to repair what's out here. The first stitch is a whip stitch. A whip stitch is exactly what it is called. So we're gonna start at one end and punch through our material, and then we're just gonna begin to whip around, working our way up. So you see I just keep coming in the top side and then it's whipped around. Do the same thing. So I'm going to come in the top side, pull it and whip it around. So you can see we're whipping that around the edge. It's a very quick, easy stitch to put in your piece of fabric. Finishing off a whip stitch is very easy. When we get to our last stitch, we go through the material, but don't pull that whip totally tight. Take your needle. Now we were running a stitch in this direction, so I'm going to point my needle in that direction, this way. I'm going to come over the top though, because that's makes it more comfortable for me. And then I'm going to point the needle back to where we were stitching, and I'm going to begin to wrap 2 or 3 times around that whip. And what that's going to do is help me create this knot. I'm going to slide my needle through that. Now you can see that looks like a mumble jumbled mess, but when I pull it tight, what it does is it binds up and puts a knot in place to finish off my stitch. I can go and cut this free, and that will keep my stitch in place very easily. A running stitch is a medium strength stitch. So we punch our needle through our material. So I could punch that in here, and I'm just going to work back and forth down this piece of material. Here, so we're just running through. It's very easy. It's not a hard stitch to learn. It becomes a very good, strong stitch that's not going to pull out too easily. If we continue the running stitch to the end of the material, or the end of the portion we need to sew, and then we've come back and fill these gaps in, what we then create is a saddle stitch. So we have gaps in between our thread, so I'm going to just fill them in. So same piece of thread, all I'm going to do is backfill those gaps. So I'm going in the hole where this piece of thread went in. I'm going to pull that through this way. And what that's going to do is give us a continuous line of thread along our piece that we're sewing. We have continuous stitching all the way down along. So this is by far the strongest stitch that we're going to use. Finishing off a saddle stitch is very easy. We started here and worked our way down, we worked our way back, and now we have 2 loose ends. We can just tie a simple overhand knot into that line, finishing off our stitch. One question that I get asked very often is, how do I knot the end of the line that I'm going to be stitching onto the material? And this is something really easy. We just fold over, so we put a bite in the line, and then I just twist this 3 or 4 times with my finger. And then I could just bring up my end through that loop, give it a tug, and that will put enough of a knot in our line that we don't have to worry about it pulling through our material. And that is the fastest overview of stitching you will ever get in your entire life, but hopefully it makes a lot of sense. Literally, those 3 stitches are the primary stitches I use for just about everything, and I've never ran into a situation that they didn't work. Now, how do you decide when to use what stitch? Well, a lot of it comes down to just thinking about the project itself and thinking how much strength you need in a stitch, and do you ever need to get that stitch out. In that case, think about a browse bed. You sew your blanket, your old blanket, fold in half, sew it down one side. Next day you're moving camp, just cut it and pull that stitch out. So something like that, you can take the stitch out really quickly, whereas a saddle stitch isn't going to come out that easily. So if we think about leather, something that's going to have a lot of tension and pressure on it, we might want to put the strongest stitch, which is a saddle stitch. And if it's something that, clothing, let's say, that's going to have some tension, but really we're never going to take it apart, maybe that running stitch will be best. So saddle stitch is the strongest, running stitch middle of the road, and then whip stitch is your weakest stitch. At least in my mind it is. But at the end of the day, you have to just experiment and play around with things. If the stitch doesn't hold, well, you're gonna know that you put the wrong stitch in. If you put the right stitch in, it should hold just perfectly. And that's all part of fun of just being out here, is experimenting and trying this stuff and having a good time with it. So these are the techniques I use. It's the gear I carry. And again, I can fix anything in my kit that I have with me. So it's important that I have these items and I understand how to do this. So this was Dan Wolak with Coalcracker Bushcraft. Hope you enjoyed this video. As always, check us out at coalcrackerbushcraft.com, and until next video, stay in the woods.